The morning of the hospital gala, I burned my hand on the curling iron. Not badly, just enough to leave a small red mark on the inside of my wrist, the kind that stings every time you bend it. I ran it under cold water for a minute, then went back to getting ready. My husband stood in the doorway of our bathroom in his tux, watching me in the mirror. "You look beautiful," he said. I smiled. "You say that every year." "I mean it every year." That's the thing about my husband, Dr. Rubu. Marcus Webb, cardiologist, 12 years at Riverside General. He always means it. That was never the problem. The problem walked into the ballroom at exactly 8:14 that evening, wearing a burgundy wrap dress and the particular kind of confidence that belongs to women who've decided they own a room before they've even looked around it. Her name was Diane, my husband's senior surgical coordinator. She'd been at Riverside General for 3 years, which was 2 years longer than I'd been paying attention to her. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I'm not the kind of person who gets jealous easily. I'm 41 years old. I teach high school English. I've read enough literature to know that jealousy is almost always about the person feeling it, not the person it's aimed at. I knew my husband. I trusted my husband. What I didn't know, not yet, was what Diane had been doing with that trust. The gala was held at the Westin downtown, the big ballroom on the 4th floor, with the chandeliers that are slightly too large for the space, so the light feels heavy somehow, pressing down on everyone. Marcus's hospital does this every November. It's a fundraiser, formal, the kind of event where the wine costs more than my grocery budget and everyone stands in small, careful clusters talking about things they'd never say at work. I'd been to 4 of these. I knew the rhythm. You arrive, you find your table. You make small talk with the attending physicians and their wives or husbands. You eat salmon that's been sitting under a heat lamp for 20 minutes. You clap for whoever the hospital's honoring that year, and you go home by 10:30. Simple. Predictable. Marcus got pulled away almost immediately. There was always some department head who needed a word, some administrator who'd been trying to schedule a meeting for 6 weeks and saw a gala as the perfect opportunity. I told him I'd find us drinks. I was fine on my own. I'm always fine on my own. I was standing at the bar, waiting for the bartender to finish with the couple ahead of me, when I felt someone step up beside me. Sarah. I turned. Diane was standing about 2 feet away, close enough to be speaking to me, far enough to be looking me over. And she was looking me over, that specific kind of survey that women sometimes do to each other. The one that starts at the shoes and moves up, slow enough to be noticed. I was wearing a navy dress. Simple cut, good fabric, the kind of thing I'd bought 2 years ago and still felt good in. My hair was up. I had on the pearl earrings my mother gave me when I got married. I watched Diane finish her survey. "You look." She paused, and I saw the corner of her mouth do something small and deliberate. "Comfortable." I smiled. "Thank you." She laughed lightly. "I just mean, it's such a formal event. You're brave to go understated." There it was. I've thought a lot about that word since then. Brave. The specific cruelty of packaging an insult as a compliment, wrapping it so tightly that if you react, you're the one who looks sensitive. She knew exactly what she was doing. She'd probably done it before. The bartender appeared. I ordered 2 glasses of Cabernet. "Marcus always talks about how you have your own sense of style," Diane continued. She was smiling now, fully. "I think it's sweet, actually. He's very protective of you." I turned to look at her then. Not sharply. Just looked at her. "Protective?" I said. He doesn't really bring you up much at work, which I think is, I don't know. Some men are like that. They keep their home life separate." She tilted her head. "It's probably healthier." The bartender slid the wine across the bar. I picked up both glasses and I looked at Diane and I thought about 12 different things in about 4 seconds. I thought about the drive downtown, Marcus's hand resting on my knee at red lights, the way he's done for 15 years. I thought about the coffee he leaves on the counter for me every morning with a sticky note that says something stupid like "You're outrageously wonderful," because he knows I need something to make me laugh before 7 a.m. I thought about how he looked at me in the bathroom mirror an hour ago. And then I thought about something else entirely. "Diane," I said, and my voice was completely even. Can I ask you something? She raised her eyebrows, expectant, a little amused. The conference in Atlanta last spring, the cardiology symposium in March, was that the same weekend as the surgical coordinator's department retreat? Something moved across her face. Fast, like a shadow when a cloud passes overhead. There and gone. I think so. Why? Just curious, I said, and I smiled at her the way you smile when you already know the answer to the question you just asked. Then I took my wine and went to find my husband. I need to back up. 6 weeks before the gala, I found a receipt. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious, not in the way people mean when they say that. I wasn't checking his phone. I wasn't questioning his hours. I wasn't any of the things you imagine a woman does when she knows something is wrong. I was going through the home office filing cabinet looking for our car insurance documents because I'd been rear-ended in a parking lot and needed to file a claim. The receipt was paperclipped to the back of a folder labeled CME, Continuing Education, a hotel receipt. Riverside Marriott, 2 nights, late February. Marcus had been in Chicago in late February. I remembered it clearly because my sister had visited that weekend and we'd done a wine and paint thing she'd been wanting to do, and I told her Marcus was at a conference, so it was perfect timing. The receipt wasn't from Chicago. I stood in the home office for a long time. My hand with the receipt in it was completely still, which surprised me because I thought I would shake. I didn't shake. I just stood there and read the hotel receipt 3 times, and then I put it back exactly where I found it. And I went and sat on the edge of the bed in our room, and I looked at the photograph on the nightstand. Marcus and me at my cousin's wedding the summer before last, his arm around me, both of us squinting into the sun and laughing at something I don't even remember anymore. I didn't say anything to him that night, or the next night. I needed to think, and I've learned, slowly, over the years, that I make better decisions when I think first. So I thought. The first thing I did was call my friend Patrice, who went through a divorce 4 years ago and came out the other side sharper than anyone I know. I didn't tell her everything. I told her enough. She told me one thing that I wrote down on a piece of paper and kept in my dresser drawer for the next 6 weeks. Information is only leverage if you understand what you're holding. The second thing I did was pay attention, not in a frantic, obsessive way. I just started noticing things I hadn't been noticing before. The way Marcus sometimes stepped into the garage to take calls. The way he'd mentioned Diane 3 times in a 2-week period in ways that felt casual, but were maybe a little too casual. Once when he was telling a story about a difficult patient. Once when he was describing a scheduling conflict. Once when he was explaining why a particular surgery had run long. The third thing I did was use a resource I'm almost embarrassed to admit I have. A former student. Daniel graduated 8 years ago. He's now a compliance officer at a healthcare administration firm that does contracting work with half the hospitals in the state, including Riverside General. I'd written him a college recommendation letter. He owed me, and more importantly, he was someone who understood the difference between something that looks wrong and something that is wrong. I met him for coffee. I asked him some general questions about how surgical coordinators' expense accounts work, how interdepartmental travel gets logged, how the hospital tracks who attends what conference and when. He answered my general questions. Then he looked at me over his coffee cup and said, "Mrs. Webb, do you want me to look at something specific?" I slid a piece of paper across the table. It had a name on it and 2 dates. He called me 9 days later. What Daniel found wasn't what I expected. I don't know what I expected. Confirmation of the obvious. A picture of something I didn't want to see. What he found was a pattern of expense reports. Diane had been submitting reimbursement claims for conferences, equipment orders, and vendor meetings that didn't match the hospital's official records. Small amounts individually, $200 here, $350 there, but when he added them up across 18 months, you were looking at somewhere in the range of $19,000. She was stealing from the hospital. Daniel explained it carefully. She'd been padding vendor invoices and routing the difference to a secondary account. The kind of scheme that's almost invisible if no one's looking for it, and nobody had been looking for it because Diane was good at her job and well-liked, and nobody had a reason to look. Nobody except me. I sat with this information for 2 weeks. I want to be honest about what those 2 weeks felt like because I think it matters to understand why I did what I did next. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't even entirely calm, whatever it might have looked like on the outside. I was, I kept coming back to one question, the one that felt like the ground shifting underneath me. Why? Why had Marcus been at the Riverside Marriott for 2 nights in February? Because Daniel's record search had turned up something else. Something I hadn't asked for, but that he felt I should know. Marcus's name appeared on a form submitted to the hospital's HR office in February. A confidential internal complaint. He had filed a formal concern about irregularities in a vendor account. He'd found it first. He'd found it and filed a formal complaint and hadn't told me. And I didn't know yet. I still don't know, not completely, whether he was staying in a hotel in our own city because he was afraid to come home to me, or because he needed space to figure out what to do, or because something else entirely had happened that I haven't finished understanding. What I knew was this. My husband had found something wrong, and he was trying to handle it, and he hadn't told me he was carrying it. And Diane, who had been stealing from his hospital, who had probably known that Marcus knew or suspected, had decided that the best defense was to make me feel small at a gala in front of a room full of his colleagues. When I walked away from the bar with those 2 glasses of wine, I found Marcus near the back of the ballroom talking to the chief of surgery. I handed him his glass. He touched the small of my back. We smiled at each other in that married way, the language of 15 years compressed into a gesture. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm good," I said. And I meant it, which surprised me a little. Dinner was served. We ate. The hospital president gave a speech. A cardiologist named Dr. Dar. Okafor received an award for his work on a pediatric heart program that had genuinely saved 11 children's lives in the past year. And when he cried a little at the podium, the whole room went quiet in a real way, not a polite way. I watched Diane from across the room for the rest of the evening. She didn't approach me again. After a conversation at the bar, she'd found a table on the opposite side of the ballroom and stayed there. And once, when our eyes met across the room, she looked away first. I thought about what Patrice had told me. Information is only leverage if you understand what you're holding. I understood what I was holding. On the drive home, Marcus was quiet. He drove the way he always drives, both hands on the wheel, steady, watching the road. The city lights came and went outside the window. I waited until we were on the highway. "I know about the expense account irregularities," I said. His hands didn't move on the wheel. A few seconds passed. "Sarah, I know you filed a complaint in February. I know you've been trying to handle it quietly." I watched the side of his face. "I just need to know why you didn't tell me." He exhaled slowly, the way he exhales when he's not going to argue, when he's deciding to simply be honest. "Because I wasn't sure what I had," he said. "And I was afraid of what it meant if I was right, and I didn't want to bring it into our house until I knew." "Bring what into our house?" "That someone I work closely with might be, that I'd missed something that serious. For that long." He paused. It felt like a failure. I looked at him for a long moment. "You filed a formal complaint," I said. "That's not what failure looks like." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." "Diane said something to me tonight at the bar." I told him what she'd said. Not dramatically, not with the weight I might have given it 6 weeks ago. Just the words, plainly. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She did what?" "She was threatened," I said. "She's probably been watching you since February, wondering how much you knew, and when she saw me, she decided, I don't know, that I was a weak point, maybe. That if she made me feel small, she'd feel safer." "Sarah." His voice had something in it that was harder than I'd heard it in a long time. "I need you to tell me exactly what she said." "I already handled it." "You." He glanced over at me. "What does that mean?" "It means I asked her a question at the bar, and she understood exactly what it meant." Another silence. "What question?" I told him about Atlanta, the symposium, the retreat, the dates that overlapped. He stared at the road. "How do you know about Atlanta, Marcus?" I kept my voice gentle. "Wives know things. We pay attention." You'd be surprised what we notice when we're paying attention." He was quiet for a long time after that. Long enough that we exited the highway and drove through 3 stoplights before he spoke again. "I should have told you sooner." "Yes, I was trying to protect you." "I know." I looked out the window. "You don't need to protect me from hard things. I can hold hard things with you. That's the whole point." He reached over and took my hand. The small red mark on my wrist from the curling iron was still there, still slightly tender. He held my hand carefully, the way you hold something you don't want to hurt further. "I love you," he said. "I know that too," I said. The hospital's internal investigation began formally 6 weeks after the gala. I know this because Marcus told me. He was interviewed twice, and the second time he came home looking hollowed out in the way people look when they've had to say difficult things out loud to people with clipboards. Diane resigned before the investigation concluded. I don't know the specific terms. I don't know if there were legal consequences beyond that, and it's not my place to know. What I know is that her problem that had been festering for 18 months was addressed, and that my husband's name came out of it intact, because his records showed he'd reported his concerns through proper channels the moment he was certain enough to act. There's something I keep coming back to, even now, months later. I keep thinking about the question I asked Diane at the bar. It was one sentence. It was completely calm. It contained no accusations, no revelations, no threats. All it did was let her know that I knew something. Not everything, just something, and that I'd been paying attention. The power wasn't in what I said. It was in what she didn't know about how much I knew. And I keep thinking about what Patrice had said. Information is only leverage if you understand what you're holding. But there's a follow-up question that I've been sitting with, one that I don't have a clean answer to. Is it healthier to use that leverage quietly, the way I did, to ask one calm question and let the other person's own fear do the rest? Or is it better to simply go to the people in charge and say, here is what I know, here is the evidence, do something about it? I honestly don't know. I think the honest answer is that both things happened. I asked one calm question at a bar, and separately, my husband filed a formal complaint through proper channels, and the combination of those two things is what moved the situation forward. The quiet question without the formal complaint would have been just a moment at a bar. The formal complaint without the quiet question might have left Diane feeling bold enough to cause more damage before the investigation concluded. I don't know that I'd do anything differently, but I also don't think what I did was the only right answer, and I've thought about that a lot. Last month, Marcus and I went to dinner at a small Italian place we've been going to for about 9 years, the one where they know our order and bring the bread before we ask. We sat in the corner booth. We shared a bottle of Barolo. We talked about nothing important for a long time, which is one of the things I love most about 15 years with the same person, that you can talk about nothing and it still feels like enough. At some point, he looked across the table at me and said, "Can I ask you something?" Of course. At the gala. At the bar. What would you have done if she hadn't flinched? If she'd just looked at you blankly and said, "What are you talking about?" I thought about it for a moment. "I would have smiled," I said, "and gone to find you." That's it. That's it. I wasn't trying to destroy her, Marcus. I was just letting her know she wasn't invisible, that someone was paying attention. I picked up my wine glass. People who are doing something wrong are terrified of that. Specifically, not of confrontation, of being seen. He nodded slowly. "She saw herself," I said. "In my question. That's why she flinched." He was quiet for a moment. "Then you're a little frightening sometimes." "Good," I said, and we both laughed, and the waiter brought our pasta, and outside the restaurant the city did what it always does, moved on, indifferent, full of other people's stories. I think about the women who don't have what I had, who don't have a Patrice or a Daniel or 15 years of knowing their husband's face well enough to see what he's carrying when he won't say it out loud. I think about what it means to be standing at a bar at a formal event while someone surveys you from shoes to hairline and packages their cruelty as a compliment, and to have no ground to stand on, not because you're weak, but because you genuinely don't know yet what you're holding. This is what I'd want to say to those women. Sometimes you're holding more than you realize. Not leverage in the transactional sense, not a chess move, not a counterattack, just information. Just the record of the things you've noticed, quietly, without making a show of it. The receipts you found, the dates that didn't match, the words someone said when they thought you weren't really listening. You've been paying attention even when you thought you weren't. That matters. That's not nothing. So I'll ask you the same question the story ends with every time I tell it. If you had been standing at that bar, if someone had looked you over and decided you were safe to diminish, what would you have said? And would you have known in that moment what you were holding? I'd really like to know. Tell me in the comments. And if the story meant something to you, if it sat with you in the way that certain things do, not loudly, but just quietly in the background, you know where the subscribe button is. I'll be here. There's something I've been thinking about since that night. Something I keep turning over the way you turn a stone in your hand, checking different sides of it in different light. What happened to Diane wasn't random. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even really about me asking the right question at the right moment. It was the result of choices she made over a long period of time, each one small enough to feel manageable, each one building on the last. She chose to take money that wasn't hers. She chose to use her position to feel powerful over the people around her. She chose to stand at a bar at a formal event and make a woman she'd never really spoken to feel small because she thought that was safe, because she thought I was the weakest point in a situation that was closing in on her. Every one of those choices had a consequence, not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical way, but because actions leave traces. They leave records. They leave impressions on the people around you, and those people are paying attention even when you think they're not. That's what I want to sit with, because I think it's the part that actually matters. I wasn't paying attention to Diane because I was suspicious or strategic. I was paying attention because I'd been quietly paying attention to my own life. To my husband's face when he came home tired, to the small inconsistencies that didn't quite add up, to the feeling that something was being carried that wasn't being shared. Attention is a habit. You practice it on the small things, and then, when something big moves through your life, you're not starting from zero. Marcus did something I'm still proud of, even though it cost him something to do it. He found a problem that implicated someone he worked with closely, and instead of looking away, which would have been so much easier, he filed a formal complaint. He did it through the right channels. He did it quietly, without making it about himself. And then he sat with the weight of it alone for longer than he should have, because he was trying to protect me from something difficult. I understand that impulse. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. Love sometimes looks like trying to stand between someone and a hard thing. The problem is that the people we love are usually more capable of holding hard things than we give them credit for. I didn't need protecting. I needed to be let in. Anne Patrice, who had sat across a coffee shop table from me years earlier during her own worst stretch and come out the other side with more clarity than most people I know, she handed me one sentence that changed how I looked at the whole situation. Not a platitude, not reassurance, just a clean, practical truth. Information is only leverage if you understand what you're holding. Intelligence without ethics is just manipulation. Ethics without intelligence is just goodwill that gets taken advantage of. You need both. You need to know what you're holding, and you need to be honest about why you're holding it and what you actually want to do with it. What I wanted was not to destroy Diane. What I wanted was for her to know that she wasn't invisible, that someone had been paying attention, that the story she'd told herself, that she was untouchable, that no one was watching, that Marcus's wife was too naive to matter, was wrong. That's all the question at the bar was, not a threat, just a mirror. She looked into it and saw herself clearly, maybe for the first time in a while. And that was enough. I think that's what quiet courage actually looks like. Not the dramatic confrontation, not the scorched earth, just the steady, patient work of knowing yourself, paying attention, telling the truth, and trusting that clarity, when you finally use it, lands harder than noise ever could.